In a system where justice is for sale, one man decided to buy the truth instead. In courthouse hallway, morning Detective Frank Reynolds, 50s, weathered face, expensive suit, walks confidently down the marble hallway with his attorney Mitchell Price, 40s, slick, power-hungry. 4 other officers trail behind them, all wearing smug expressions. Frank leans toward Mitchell, lowering his voice, despite his evident confidence. This is practically a formality. Our guy on the inside says Judge Harmon's already in our pocket. He straightens his tie, a flash of a diamond cufflink catching the light from the massive windows overlooking downtown. Mitchell doesn't share his client's confidence. Don't get cocky, Frank. This witness they're bringing in, this Johnson guy, he's supposedly got some evidence. He clutches his leather briefcase tighter, eyes darting to the other officers who seem equally unconcerned. Frank laughs, the sound echoing off the marble. Johnson's a nobody, some pencil pusher from the bureau with a grudge. Trust me, by lunch, we'll be celebrating at Sullivan's on the taxpayer's dime. The other officers chuckle in agreement, their badges gleaming under the courthouse lights. They approach the courtroom doors where District Attorney Elena Martinez, 40s, determined no-nonsense, stands reviewing documents with her assistant. Her eyes narrow as she spots the approaching group, and she hands the file to her assistant before squaring her shoulders. Enjoy your swagger while it lasts, Reynolds. Today's the day your empire crumbles, Elena says coldly, standing her ground as the group of officers tries to intimidate her with their presence. Frank steps forward, towering over Elena. You've got nothing, Elena. 5 years you've been trying to nail me, and 5 years you've failed. What makes today any different? His breath smells of expensive coffee and arrogance. Elena simply smiles, a knowing look in her eyes. You'll see. She turns and walks into the courtroom, leaving Frank momentarily unsettled before he shakes it off and follows. The courtroom is packed with journalists, police officers, and curious onlookers. The tension in the air is palpable as Frank and his co-defendants take their seats at the defense table, still radiating confidence despite the serious charges they face. Corruption, evidence tampering, extortion, and racketeering. Judge Harmon, 60s, stern, with a reputation for being tough but fair, enters, and the bailiff calls the court to order. Frank exchanges a subtle nod with the judge, reinforcing his belief that the fix is in. Elena announces, "The people call Robert Johnson to the stand," her voice strong and clear. The doors at the back of the courtroom open and a man in his late 50s enters. He's unassuming at first glance, average height, salt and pepper hair, wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit. Frank leans back in his chair, whispering to Mitchell. That's him? He looks like he should be selling insurance, not testifying against us. But there's something in the way the man carries himself, a quiet authority that makes several of Frank's co-defendants shift uncomfortably. Robert Johnson is sworn in, his voice steady and measured as he takes the oath. Elena approaches the witness stand, her steps deliberate. Please state your name and occupation for the record. Johnson straightens slightly. My name is Robert Johnson. For the past 3 years, I've been working undercover in an operation targeting police corruption in this city. But my actual title is Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The courtroom erupts. Frank's face drains of color as whispers cascade through the gallery. Judge Harmon's gavel comes down hard, but the shock waves cannot be contained. Frank grabs Mitchell's arm, panic replacing his earlier arrogance. Order! Order in the court! Judge Harmon shouts, bringing the room back to an uneasy silence. His eyes dart nervously to Frank, the confident nod from earlier replaced by visible sweat on his brow. FBI Director Johnson sits calmly in the witness box, unruffled by the commotion. 3 years ago, we received credible information about a network of corruption within this city's police department. Rather than delegate the investigation, I chose to oversee it personally, to go undercover as a mid-level FBI analyst named Robert Johnson, who was supposedly conducting routine audits of interdepartmental cooperation. Elena produces a series of files, handing them to the clerk to be entered as evidence. "And what did you discover during your investigation, Director Johnson?" Johnson's eyes lock with Frank's. "I discovered a criminal enterprise operating within the police department, led by Detective Reynolds. They extorted local businesses, sold confiscated drugs back to dealers, tampered with evidence in major cases, and blackmailed city officials, including members of the judiciary." At this, Judge Harmon stands abruptly. "I need to recuse myself from these proceedings immediately." But 2 FBI agents who had been sitting in the gallery are already moving toward the bench. One of Frank's co-defendants, Officer Patrick Walsh, 30s, formerly cocky, now terrified, suddenly stands. "I want to cut a deal. I had no idea how deep this went. I'll testify." Frank lunges at Walsh, but court officers quickly restrain him. "You traitor!" Frank screams as he's pulled away. "I made you. I made all of you." From a structural perspective, this section operates as what screenwriters call the third act turn, or the climax of the traditional dramatic structure. After the shocking revelation that Robert Johnson is the FBI director, this section details the immediate aftermath and shows how quickly a seemingly impenetrable corrupt system can collapse when its foundations are undermined. The pacing accelerates here, with multiple rapid developments showing the domino effect of the central revelation. A transformed courtroom atmosphere, described as controlled chaos. This juxtaposition of terms is significant. While chaos suggests disorder and panic, the qualifier controlled indicates that this apparent disorder is proceeding according to the FBI's plan. This tension between chaos and control mirrors the larger thematic concerns of the script. The tension between lawlessness and justice, between corruption and order. The physical transformation of the space is reinforced by the arrival of additional FBI agents carrying boxes of evidence. These boxes serve as tangible symbols of the investigation's thoroughness, each one representing countless hours of surveillance, documentation, and preparation. Their physical presence in the courtroom creates a visual reminder of how extensive the FBI's operation has been. Where previously Frank Reynolds and his co-defendants dominated the courtroom with their physical presence and confidence, now the evidence boxes and FBI agents command the space, reflecting the shift in power dynamics. Director Johnson's continued testimony in this section reveals the impressive scope and strategic patience of the FBI operation. His calm, measured delivery stands in stark contrast to the growing panic among the defendants. This contrast in behavior emphasizes the professional discipline of law enforcement at its best versus the unraveling composure of criminals when exposed. The line, "When Detective Reynolds approached Judge Harmon about fixing today's hearing, we were ready," is particularly significant. It reveals that the FBI wasn't just passively collecting evidence of past crimes. They were actively monitoring ongoing corruption, allowing it to play out under surveillance in order to capture every participant in the act. This strategy of allowing criminals to incriminate themselves while under observation is a sophisticated law enforcement technique that the script accurately portrays. Johnson's methodical enumeration of the evidence, every conversation was recorded, every payoff was documented, every threat was captured on surveillance, creates a rhythmic, almost hypnotic cadence that emphasizes the comprehensiveness of the investigation. The repetition of every hammers home that nothing was missed. The final declarative statement, "We have it all," serves as the definitive closure to any hope the defendants might have had of finding a loophole or escape. Mitchell Price's abrupt decision to withdraw as counsel represents the first major defection from Frank's inner circle. The attorney's body language quietly closes his briefcase and stands, communicates volumes about his recognition that the game is over. The briefcase, previously a symbol of legal authority and protection, now becomes merely an accessory to his retreat. Price's announcement reflects a calculated self-preservation instinct. His statement, "I need to withdraw as counsel for Detective Reynolds, effective immediately," uses formal legal language as a shield, attempting to create distance between himself and Frank's crimes. This is followed by his disclaimer about having no knowledge of the extent of my client's activities, which represents a common defense strategy when criminal conspiracies collapse, claiming ignorance while trying to minimize personal involvement. The behavioral psychology at work here is fascinating. Price, who moments earlier was a confident defender of his client, immediately shifts to self-preservation mode when he recognizes the extent of the evidence. This rapid transformation illustrates how quickly loyalty dissolves in corrupt systems when exposure occurs. The ties between corrupt individuals are revealed to be based on mutual benefit rather than any genuine loyalty or principle. Elena Martinez's response to Price delivers another devastating blow, revealing that the attorney himself is deeply implicated in the corruption. Her presentation of specific numbers, 17 separate occasions of witness tampering and 12 instances of judicial bribery, demonstrates the meticulous documentation of the investigation. These aren't vague accusations, but precisely counted instances with supporting evidence. The detail here serves two narrative purposes. It shows the viewers that the corruption extended beyond the police department into the legal system itself, implicating defense attorneys and, by extension, judges, and it demonstrates that the investigation left no stone unturned. The specificity of the numbers suggests hard evidence rather than circumstantial accusations. Elena's suggestion that Price might want to find yourself an attorney contains both irony and poetic justice. The man who represented criminals now finds himself in need of criminal defense. This role reversal effectively illustrates how justice is realigning the system that had been perverted by corruption. The physical collapse of Mitchell back into his chair, described as defeated, provides visual punctuation to his downfall. This moment of physical surrender complements the legal surrender he has just attempted, creating a complete picture of a man whose position has become untenable. Frank Reynolds' increasingly desperate protests represent the classic progression of criminal excuses when confronted with overwhelming evidence. His claim of entrapment represents a legal Hail Mary, attempting to invoke a technical defense that rarely succeeds even in legitimate cases. This demonstrates his grasping at legal straws, showing how a once powerful figure is reduced to ineffectual complaints. His declaration, "You can't do this," represents a deeper psychological truth, his fundamental disbelief that the system he corrupted and manipulated for years could ever be turned against him. This reflects the typical cognitive distortion of corrupt officials who come to believe they are untouchable, developing a sense of immunity that makes their downfall all the more shocking when it finally arrives. Frank's final appeal, "I know people," is particularly revealing. It indicates that his power was never based on the law or legitimate authority, but rather on a network of corrupt relationships. This statement inadvertently confirms the systemic nature of the corruption, suggesting that his influence extended to unnamed powerful figures who could ordinarily have protected him. The desperation in this statement reveals how Frank has always operated, through influence, favor trading, and implicit threats, rather than through legitimate channels. Director Johnson's calm response to Frank's desperate claim delivers the final devastating blow. "Yes, you do know people, Detective Reynolds, and now we know them too." This statement functions on multiple levels. First, it confirms that the FBI's investigation didn't just target Frank and his immediate circle, but mapped the entire network of corruption. The implication is clear. Everyone Frank could possibly call on for help is either already implicated or under investigation themselves. Second, the director's composure contrasts sharply with Frank's unraveling, emphasizing the shift in power dynamics. Where Frank is reduced to emotional outbursts, Johnson remains professional and methodical, embodying the patient, inexorable nature of justice when properly applied. Third, it communicates to the viewer that the resolution will be comprehensive. This isn't just about punishing a few corrupt cops, but about cleaning up an entire system. This aligns with the structural requirements of the script, setting up the broader societal implications that will be addressed. From a filmmaking perspective, the unraveling would likely be shot with increasing pace, using editing techniques that accelerate as the sequence progresses. The camera work might begin with stable, composed shots of Director Johnson's testimony, then gradually incorporate more handheld, unstable framing as Frank and his associates begin to panic. The visual contrast between the steadily composed FBI director and the increasingly disheveled defendants would create a visual metaphor for the moral contrast between them. Reaction shots would be crucial here, capturing the faces of various corrupt officials as they realize their precarious position, perhaps with special attention to Judge Harmon, whose complicity has been directly exposed. Sound design would likely reinforce the unraveling theme, with the background murmurs of the courtroom growing throughout the scene, punctuated by Frank's increasingly desperate outbursts and the decisive gavel strikes as officers move to control the situation. This section reveals the true character of several key players under pressure. Frank, who appeared confident and untouchable earlier, now shows his true nature, desperate, entitled, and ultimately powerless when his corrupt network fails him. His transformation from swagger to panic illustrates how much his identity was built on a false sense of power. Mitchell Price reveals himself as an opportunist without principles, immediately abandoning his client when self-preservation becomes necessary. This quick betrayal suggests that the corruption was always a transactional relationship rather than one built on loyalty or shared purpose. Elena Martinez emerges as methodical and prepared, having worked patiently toward this moment of justice. Her reveal that she has evidence against Price suggests she has been several steps ahead throughout, belying Frank's earlier dismissal of her as ineffective. Director Johnson demonstrates the traits of ideal leadership: patient strategy, personal courage in going undercover, and calm professionalism even in moments of high tension. His willingness to personally lead the dangerous undercover operation instead of delegating it shows both his commitment to justice and his recognition of the serious threat that corruption poses to the entire system. This section creates powerful narrative momentum that propels the story toward its conclusion. By rapidly dismantling the corrupt network, it creates space for the final part to address the broader implications and begin the healing process for the community. The arrest of Frank and his associates, the recusal and implicit arrest of Judge Harmon, and the exposure of Mitchell Price set up the comprehensive justice that will be described in Part 5. Additionally, the revelation that the corruption extended to 37 police officers, 12 judges, 7 prosecutors, and 23 other public officials, as will be stated in Part 5, is prepared by the comprehensive nature of the evidence presented in this section. The unraveling functions as the pivotal moment where justice finally gains the upper hand over corruption, where years of patient investigation bear fruit, and where the true character of each player is revealed under pressure. It delivers the emotional satisfaction of seeing corrupt officials face consequences while maintaining the procedural realism of how such operations actually work. Through carefully constructed dialogue, meaningful physical actions, and strategic pacing, this section transforms the initial power dynamics completely, setting up the thematic resolution that follows in the final part of the script. Director Johnson stands before a forest of microphones, cameras flashing around him. The afternoon sun casts long shadows across the courthouse steps as he addresses the media. Today marks the culmination of Operation Clean Sweep, one of the most extensive anti-corruption investigations in FBI history. 37 police officers, 12 judges, 7 prosecutors, and 23 other public officials have been indicted on various charges related to this corruption network. A reporter shouts from the crowd, "Director Johnson, why did you personally go undercover instead of assigning agents to the case?" Johnson pauses, considering his answer carefully. When corruption reaches this level, when those we trust to uphold the law are the ones breaking it, extraordinary measures are required. I needed to see it firsthand. I needed to understand how deep the rot went so we could cut it out completely. Inside a police transport vehicle, Frank Reynolds sits handcuffed, watching the press conference on a small monitor. The cocky smile is gone, replaced by the hollow stare of a man whose empire has crumbled to dust. Elena Martinez joins Director Johnson at the microphones. This is just the beginning. We will be reviewing every case these officers and judges were involved in. Justice may have been delayed, but it will not be denied. As the sun sets over the city, citizens gather spontaneously on the courthouse steps, some holding candles, others embracing police officers not implicated in the scandal. A city beginning the long process of healing and rebuilding trust. Director Johnson removes his jacket in his temporary office at the Federal Building and looks out over the city skyline. His phone rings, the Attorney General calling for an update. Johnson picks up, his voice tired but satisfied. It's done. Now the real work begins.